Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a special episode of On the Radar, presented by Pakistan Geostrategic Review in association with the Centre for Strategic and Contemporary Research, CSCR, based in Islamabad. The reason why I mentioned that this is a special episode is because we have two featured researchers with us who have co authored a perspective paper for CSCR titled Pakistan's Foreign Policy in Transition Driving Factors and Emerging Trends. I'm joined with my friend and co host, Mr. Talha Ibrahim, who is Director Academics at CSCR. A brief introduction about the guests. Maryam Raashed is a graduate of International Relations from National Defence University, Islamabad. She is currently associated with CSCR as a research assistant. She has been extensively working on international politics of South Asia, specifically focusing on internal and external politics of India and Afghanistan. Ms. Rida Anwaar is a political researcher and blogger with a bachelor's degree in international relations from National Defence University as well. Besides having a knack for research and writing, she has been an enthusiastic debater and public speaking mentor since her university days. Before gaining experience as a research assistant at CSCR, she worked as a research intern at the Islamabad Policy Research Institute (IPRI) and also the Islamabad Strategic Studies Institute (ISSI). Rida plans to continue her future research in the area of environmental politics, specifically on the climate policies of major powers. So without further ado, here's welcoming Rida Anwar and Maryam Rashid to the program. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much for having us, sir.
So, Maryam and Rida, since I know how closely both of you have worked on this paper, I would like to start by asking a fundamental question that I believe would be uh, under deliberation by many of the readers who have gone through your this published perspective piece. So the question is, and the prelude to the question is that you have mentioned that you have mentioned that in Pakistan, foreign policy has ensued from the interplay of normative ideals in the elites and the masses and the national means at and the national mean at Pakistan's disposal. So, is it reasonable to assume that there is a unanimity, there is a semblance, a congruence among the elites and masses on certain sets of belief? If we look at it from the perspective of a state that has not been able to consolidate its history in the past 7 decades, so where does this congruence lie?
Sir, to begin with, when we started, and I believe that this is an excellent question from you. And the reason is this, that while we were working on this perspective paper, I think a very major chunk of our time and a very major chunk of the brainstorming that we did for the perspective paper, that was that was attributed to this particular aspect of Pakistan's foreign policy, where we did debates, and where I and Rida, we discussed this thing together, that to what kind of extent has these normative ideals of the elite and the masses, to what extent they have played their role in determining the foreign policy of Pakistan. Now, the interesting thing about this is that if we look at the normative ideals theoretically, and not particularly the normative ideals of the people of Pakistan, but as a whole, theoretically, ideology plays a very important role. In any country's foreign policy, ideology is something that has a very determining role. In particular, when we studied Pakistan, an interesting thing that we came up with was that ideology was very much there as a part and parcel of the foreign policy of Pakistan, but it was something which did not show up in every foreign policy issue in the same way. So there were certain foreign policy issues where foreign policy played a very key role, and then there were some other issues where we saw foreign policy ideology not playing that kind of role. One example of this can be Pakistan's foreign policy towards USA during the non-alignment during the Cold War, and Pakistan's foreign policy towards China. So we see that Pakistan's ideology, it played a key role, and Pakistan, the normative inclinations of the people and the masses, they played a key role while Pakistan had to choose between the United States and the USSR. But when it came to China, the same ideological inclinations that we had, they were to quite an extent dormant in the case of China. So, two things which are important when we discuss the normative ideals. Number one, the normative ideals are there and they do play a very important role, but the way they play their role, that is not the same in every case, and that is not same in every kind of foreign policy issue. The second important thing is that in many cases now, while we had this idea that the normative ideals were there playing their role, but at the same time, the idea was that it was not necessary for a confluence of normative ideals to be there between the public opinion and the organizational elites. For instance, if you see the foreign policy decision that we made when Pakistan had to participate in fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan, you know, at that point, the organizational elite and the masses, they were to quite an extent, their normative ideals were in confluence. But the same after, following this, when overnight Pakistan decided to participate in USA's global war on terror, at that point in time, the organizational elite was there having a different ideological inclination, the organizational elite have different normative ideals, and if not normative ideals, I would call them strategic interests. And the overall, the masses, they were not in the favor of this policy that was chosen or that was made, and the policy was taking part in the US war on terror. So ideology has been there, but not in every case. There were instances when Pakistan took some policy options in which the public opinion was not very much in favor of the decision. Global war on terror is one of that. That the public opinion was very much against it. The people whom you were considering as mujahideens, and the people who were the fighters from the state whom you respected a lot, you had to convert them into they became your enemies all of a sudden overnight. So ideology is there. In many cases it has played its role, in many cases it has not been as much proactive and as much pronounced in the foreign policy of Pakistan. But yes, having said that, we cannot rule out this factor that ideology was either there completely or was not there completely. So it was there in some cases, it was not there in some cases. But yes, there was not necessarily a confluence between the normative ideals of the organizational elite and the masses at any given point of time.
Quite interesting.
And my first question yes, Rida, would you like to add something to this?
Just a little bit of what Maryam said, if you'd allow me.
Yes, definitely.
Because it's a really interesting question, I would say, like Maryam said. The point that is it reasonable to assume that is there unanimity between the elites and the masses? So I believe from this perspective that the pressure is built up from the masses, but to some extent, and it's all on the political elites whether to listen to it or not, like it happened during the Soviet war. And if we look into the future foreign policy decision, a very significant decision which is on the heads of our elites at the moment, this is a question that whether we should recognize Israel or not. It's a very heated debate. And on this point, I believe that as our nation and the masses, we are emotionally driven because of our normative ideals. We tend to unite on 2 points. Number one is our unification on normative ideals. That's where the nation and the elites are on the same point. And number two is, if we have to devise a policy or we have to react against India. So, uh, on the topic of the future policy, which is whether we will recognize Israel or not, I believe if situations like this are on hand, then it's good to it's easier to assume, and it's reasonable to assume that yes, the elites and masses, they are on the same point. But again, the driving force behind this public opinion and the elites, their perspective being on the same point, the driving force behind is our emotionally driven opinions about regarding our beliefs. This is where we unite. I hope it makes sense what I'm trying to say.
Well, it indeed does make sense. So basically, I think your added perspective on what Mariam elaborated earlier uh, quite gives an impression about the ideological underpinnings of Pakistan's foreign policy orientation. Uh, so coming to the next question now, this is something which I noticed was perhaps, in my personal opinion, the crux of your perspective paper. And you've written that Pakistan's traditional security centric diplomacy is gradually being superseded with economic diplomacy. And this is something which the current government in Pakistan, especially the Special Assistant to Prime Minister on National Security, has been trying to emphasize now and then. If we subtract the PR hype around the Look Africa and Engage Africa initiative, which has a very good trade factor into all of this, Islamabad appears to be fixated on issues involving Afghan peace process and Persian Gulf stability, Iran, Arab Gulf countries, and this and that. So, how would you explain this predicament? So, we talk about economic diplomacy, but it seems that these two are the major issues with which we are occupied.
Right. It's an excellent question, because I had fun time writing and exploring about how even listening to Dr. Moeed Yusuf's interviews and his narrative on how our diplomatic policy posture has changed per se. He used the word shifted, but then he clarified that it's not. It is a shift, and it's not a shift as well. How? Because uh, this is what we have been doing on ground, that the Pakistan's foreign policy has been economic centric from day one. But this is sort of the declaration of the term economic diplomacy. It is a declaration of our narrative internationally that from now onwards, the dominating focus of Pakistan's foreign policy would be economy centric. Previously, it was dominatingly security centric, but now the shift has been towards economy. So how I perceived, and then we collaborated and we jot down on, we were on the same point, both of us, that although economy is the dominant feature of our foreign policy at the moment, but a very good change about this government is that it has taken all three aspects of of a good foreign policy into account, which hasn't been done in the previous governments, in my opinion. That strategic importance to security and economy, it has been, the triad has been collaborated, and the foreign policy has been based on these 3 points. It's not like that only it's security centric, or it's only economically driven motives of foreign policy. So with that being said, look Africa or Engage Africa foreign policy initiatives, I believe that it's very soon to say that they're only a PR hype, because this is what the this government's, you can say, routine has been, that they are taking baby steps in formulating, in recognizing new ventures and new areas. And slowly, steadily, we see that they are thriving in their changed narrative and changed foreign policy posture. So I would say that it's very soon to say that look Asia, look Africa and engage Africa foreign policies and the bilateral economic ties. They are just a economic hype.
So, allow me to interject. You were saying that government is taking baby steps toward its ambition of promoting economic diplomacy. So, would it be inappropriate to say that they are perhaps facing a resistance, or do you think that slow pace is because of adopting a calibrated and precautious approach toward that factor?
So it's not about the calibrated approach, or is they are not facing any resistance per se, because just like I said, that they have been doing this in the previously as well. That the foreign policy and the diplomatic ventures, they have been economically driven, but not very dominantly. So it's not something new which is going on ground right now. But I was specifically talking about the Look Africa and Engage Africa policy, that it has just begun in the beginning of this year, 2020, and it will take some time in ventures like Exploring Africa to prove actually some concrete changes in our economic ties on ground. It's not like, for example, if we take relations with Russia, slowly and gradually we are increasing from our military exchanges, from our military ties, to we are gradually moving towards the economic ties. So that's what I'm seeing, that this is sort of a trend the current government is following with
Okay.
with the countries which we haven't explored before. So they are sort of being not cautious or restraining themselves because of some external factors, but I think they are taking it slow.
Pretty much of what Rida has already said. I think while Pakistan has, embarked upon the strategy, embarked upon this policy that it has to, improve or establish its footprint across regional countries. Because when we listen to the policymakers in specific, if I talk about the National Security Advisor, current National Security Advisor Moeed Yusuf, uh, at the moment, regional integration and engagement on regional level is very much a part and parcel of Pakistan's foreign policy. But the important underpinning of this is that this is something which is new, and that is something which we have discussed in the foreign policy in our paper as well. That this is something which is being experienced after the PTI government has, taken up the realms of the country, the reins of the country. So,
Okay.
to quite an extent, to quite an extent, while the Pakistani government has said that it would start on with its engagement with countries, with African countries, with East Asian countries. The reason why we are lacking that pace is because it is because the process has just started. So if we talk about India, India had probably started engaging with African countries quite some time ago. In case of East Asian countries, India already has its policy of engaging with East Asian countries, with other regional countries. But for Pakistan, this is something which it has taken up quite lately and quite recently. So probably the pace that we lack at the moment is because of the reason that this is something which we have just started off with. The pace of it might,
Interesting.
increase with the passage of time. Again, that depends on the kind of political system that a country, that prevails in our country, the kind of political party that comes in the next few years. Again, the foreign policy pretty much depends on that. But still, if we have to, if we have to going forward, if we want to gauge that how much of engagement, Pakistan would have with other regional countries, that is certainly, that is certainly to stand the test of time, and that is something which you would get to know with the passage of time.
Interesting. Interesting.
So if you'll allow me, I'll just comment on the last part of the question.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
like like you said, that Islamabad remains fixated on the issues of Afghan peace process and the Persian Gulf stability. On that note, I would say that there is an underlining to both the economic diplomacy as well as to carry out the security-centric diplomacy as well. Why? Because both of these regions and states, they are important for Pakistan's economic diplomacy regarding CPEC, that's to have stability in Afghanistan, and at the same time to to have better relations with the Persian Gulf and to engage Iran as well to be a part of this economic venture. So, in order to create a quad in future, which will be very beneficial for Pakistan and its foreign policy and its economic diplomacy as well, to have China, Afghanistan, and Iran and Pakistan, all of them on the same page regarding BRI on a whole and CPEC. So these two issues, the Afghan peace process and the stability in the Persian Gulf, they remain to be very important for Pakistan, and it remains for Pakistan to have a closer look in these two regions because of their economic diplomacy as well, and to have a regional stability overall as well.
Okay.
So, it is noted in this perspective paper that on the issue of our ideology, it is written that the era of Islamized foreign policy seems to be in departure. So, I'm confused about this, and I'm sure most of the people who have gone through this piece, they would be feeling the same as well. Now, having had discussions with you, I know the motivations that compelled you to pen down this observation. But for the consumption of those who are watching this video and who have gone through your perspective paper, let me ask you, doesn't Prime Minister Imran Khan's repeated mentioning of Pakistan as a Muslim welfare state suggest that the role of religion in matters of statecraft has increased rather than a decrease that you think has happened?
That's a very pertinent question.
Exactly, sir. This is an excellent question, and as Satalha knows that on this point we debated a lot on that the Islamized foreign policy era, it seems to be in departure. But at the same time, Prime Minister Imran Khan on international forums is giving out symbolic representation of this reminder that ideology will never be out of the question in formulating domestic as well as the foreign policies. How he mentions the continuously the point of Muslim welfare state, he has also mentioned it in his UNGA recent UNGA speech as well, that he wants to build Pakistan into a Muslim welfare state. This is a constant. These constant reminders are there because we, as a state, we don't want to the international community to see us that we are departing from from the ideal factor of our foreign policy, but we want to change that narrative, that from the extremist how we are perceived as an extremist Islamized state, we want to change that narrative into a balanced state which is built on the basis of Islamized ideology, but at the same time we are not extremists.
If I may ask you, Rida, so basically, if what you're trying to say is that Islamabad should shift from being an Islamic state to a Muslim state. Is that what you are saying? There's a
Exactly,
big
sir.
difference,
That we
obviously.
Exactly, that we are perceived internationally as an Islamized state. That's why the Islamophobia and our perception internationally is very negative. So, in order to counter that negative perception internationally, this government is is taking is taking good initiatives, and their main priority is to change that international negative narrative of Pakistan and to change it into a Muslim state, but which is not an extremist state.
I'm sorry, I would just like to ask one additional sub question to Rida on this. Rida, I won't take any names, but we are aware that recently a very known radical organization in Pakistan has been carrying out, national level resistance against, not resistance, well, they're trying to challenge the rate of the state. How far do you think has that complemented or discounted the Prime Minister's efforts to remove that misperception of Pakistan being an Islamized state?
That's an
Just a very
excellent
quick take on
follow-up
this.
question.
Very
Yes,
quick
yes.
take on this.
So as if we take into account FATF and our efforts in rejecting that aspect, that we are not a state which is sponsoring terrorism, we are facing a lot of challenges, and that particular incident which happened, it is a part of that challenge as well. That although our efforts are in the right direction, but still the challenges remains in the shape of groups and elements like these. The government and the establishment is facing challenges, and they will be in the future, but they are trying their best, I believe, to counter them.
Indeed. And Mariam, would you like to add something on this?
So there are two things that I would want to add on this is number one, when we talked about this, assertion that the era of an Islamized foreign policy is on departure, what we meant by that was essentially the fact that Pakistan's identity of being a Muslim majority state, that is not something which is going to determine Pakistan's foreign policy with any state. And this has happened in the past. So there are countless instances where we can say the Muslim identity of the Muslim majority identity of Pakistan was invoked, to pursue a particular foreign policy option. So one thing which we meant was this, that this particular factor, that Pakistan is a Muslim majority state, that sentiment would not be invoked while we would be pursuing our foreign policy. Then be it the Middle Eastern countries, or be it Afghanistan, or be it any other state, the factors that would determine our foreign policy, that would be our geoeconomic interests. Second thing which I would say about this is that when we talk about Islamic welfare state, number one, when the Prime Minister talked about an Islamic welfare state, I think that is a huge assertion. You cannot, in current nation state system, I do not think that you can come up with a political system that that is well suited and that has this tint of the state of Medina that we had at that point. So number one, while the state says that it wants to follow a model of Islamic welfare state, I think that is a very ambitious policy goal, and that might not practically manifest itself into something achievable. And with regards to the thing that you said about this one particular religious organization, I think yes, that is a huge challenge to the foreign policy of Pakistan and to the domestic politics of Pakistan as well. Because if we if we try to do an analysis of the last general election, this one particular party, it had a huge vote bank. So of course, while we say that we are moving away from that Islamized foreign policy, again, the one thing that I said earlier while replying to the first question, that this is something that would stand the test of time. When we see political organizations which have this religious tint to it, getting so much popular in Pakistan, getting so much relevant to the politics of the country, I think it is very difficult to say that in future as well we would be able to pursue a foreign policy that is not Islamized in its nature.
And I asked this question, of this particular religious organization because their core demand was basically to
Exactly.
disrupt relations with a particular country. So obviously they're trying
Exactly.
to influence foreign policy.
Exactly. So, while the current government, and the idea which we were pursuing in the perspective paper as well, was that the current government, it has this objective that its foreign policy would not be devised by certain ideological inclinations, and it might try to do that. And currently, if we see our foreign policy towards the Middle Eastern countries, it quite clearly manifested that our ideological inclinations, or our state of being Muslims, a Muslim state, that was not determining pretty much our relations with the Middle Eastern countries. But yes, there is an increasing challenge of the fact that these religious inclinations, they might come at the crossroads with Pakistan's foreign policy in coming few years.
At the risk of asking another question, and this builds upon Talha's very comprehensive question, which has touched a very uh, important note for me at least. I would like to ask the both of you, whichever one of you would like to respond, that when we talk about that particular religious organization which tried to disrupt relations with a particular country, what I read on the media was that the government had actually acceded to their demand of summoning the French ambassador and trying to ask them that they should expel him from the country. So it seems that the current incumbent government has actually ceded to the demand of a party which does not have any prior governmental experience. So, do you really think that what they're saying and what they're trying to achieve is at very odds with each other?
So you see, when we talk about this one particular aspect of Pakistan's foreign policy at the moment, that is that we say that the Islamized era of the foreign policy is not very much there. It seems to be in departure. In that case, there are certain foreign policy decisions that have been made that did not have that particular, ideological tint to it. For instance, when we talk about Pakistan's current foreign policy towards the Middle Eastern countries, when the PTI government it came to power, Saudi Arabia, the kind of relations that we had with Saudi Arabia, they had an underpinning of ideological definitely. But on the issue of Kashmir, the foreign minister of Pakistan, he was very much clear about, and there was this one statement by him in which he was very assertive of how of how Pakistan plans to, go forward with its relations with the Middle Eastern countries. So while there is this aspect in the foreign policy that we are, Pakistan is trying to take up foreign policy decisions that do not have an Islamist or an ideological tint to it, there are certainly incidents that have taken place in very proximate history, proximate past, and with reference to that particular uprising that took place a few days ago, I would say there are challenges, of course. So that is, that this particular religious organization, which has huge, I would say, political support with it, this is definitely a huge challenge for the state of Pakistan, while it is, trying to pursue a foreign policy that is based on geo-economic interests rather than ideologically inclined policies.
So I'll add
And
just one line.
yes, Rida. Yes, please.
I would say that if we talk previously and historically, we see that these incidences, they have happened in the past as well. So if it were to say that the somehow the Islamized era has not left us, and it's not in the past, it's not completely true, but it could be taken in this specific incident which you're talking about, that maybe the demands of this group were to be fulfilled by the government. Maybe they were to be fulfilled. So maybe they're just trying to make sure that ideology remains a part of our domestic as well as our foreign policy, and that
Interesting.
we do not on the face of it just show that yes, we are a Muslim state, yes, we are very true to our ideology and our religion, we actually represent on international forum, which the government was pressured to. And that's why our foreign minister actually made a mistake while saying that we will call back our ambassador from France, whereas at the moment we didn't even have a diplomatic, we didn't have an ambassador in France. So we made a mistake, but
Indeed.
under pressure, by saying, remaining true to the fact, to our nation, the elite had to say, in order to pacify them, that yes, ideology is and will remain the part of it. So you don't have to get that much engraved and worked up on it. So it was somehow to ease up the masses as well, and to clarify to the international community that yes, we are on the era has changed, but ideology still remains there.
So,
Okay, and so let's, Talha, I'd like to, would you like to add something to this, or can I move on to my next question?
okay, before you move on to your next question, let me harken back to the line, one particular line that they have employed in this piece. And that line is that Islam will remain an underlying feature, if not the dominant feature of Pakistan's foreign policy.
Maryam, would
Can
you
you?
like to comment on that?
Sir, you see, again, while we talk about this Islamized era of foreign policy in departure, again, this is the public opinion, the the opinion of the masses that exists here. Foreign policy can never be foregone, and I do not think that this is something particular to Pakistan alone. Any country, no matter where it is located on the map of the world, it has a particular ideology. No matter what kind of ideology it is, it might be religious or political, economic. They ideology is something that you cannot walk away from. So ideology is there. It might have a role that would be a little dormant in its nature, but at any point, I do not think that we can simply walk away from ideology. So the idea was this: that while the state of Pakistan, it continues to ascribe to the ideology of Pakistan, the way it approaches to the way it approaches to that ideology, that has essentially changed in its nature.
Okay, that clarifies a lot of things, and I think that's a very pertinent point you have made over here. That the way in which that has manifested itself has changed, and so now I think let's shift from ideology towards some more technical issues which are related to the subject of your paper, and that is I'm going to talk about the structural element of foreign policy, and when we talk about that aspect, we are obviously talking about institutional structures. And as you might be aware, and you have been following definitely, that since early 2019, India's Ministry of External Affairs, which is the equivalent of our Foreign Office, it underwent restructuring, and it has gradually adapted itself with changing geostrategic interests. We have East African island countries, Comoros, Madagascar, French Réunion. They were added to the Indian Ocean Region division. The Iowa division was expanded basically. So before they were in Africa and in the South Indian Ocean, and now they are part of the overall Iowa. And we have a new Indo-Pacific division, which has also been added by New Delhi. Now, in contrast, despite Pakistan, we see that Gwadar is being touted and routinely projected as the hub and spoke connecting the Belt and Road with the maritime Silk Route, and the talk about CPEC. It seems that Pakistan's Foreign Office continues to follow the traditional path. It has not carried out any structuring, it has not revised its organogram. So, don't you think that the lack of interest in structural adaptability, it actually indicates a lack of vision and maintenance of the status quo?
So, if we talk about, in particular, about lack of vision, I would say that let's, as an example, let's compare the structural changes that are taking place in India, not in particular, in the past few years, but overall. If we talk about, the reorganization that you said, I think there are two developments that are currently taking place in India, which are very important, which have which have put India on a very positive trajectory in terms of its policy making. But it is also very important because Pakistan needs to gear up with them. Number one is the transformation that their Ministry of External Affairs is undergoing, and number two is the transformation or the organizational or the change in the structure, in the organizational structure of their armed forces. So there are these two
Indeed.
things. Yeah, so I would actually, while you have mentioned about the Ministry of External Affairs, I would talk about both of them, because I think both of these,
The defense also, basically. You're looking at them together.
yeah, because I believe, if we could have a discussion over this, that your military prowess is also a part of your foreign policy and how you translate your objectives, foreign policy objectives, into tangible goals. So military is a part of that. And if we talk about India, India has certainly attached a lot of importance and significance to both of these aspects. If we in particular talk about the maritime culture that India is, I would say, investing a lot in, or if we talk about the military structure, both of these, they are very important. They have taken place. Now, if I talk about, Pakistan, I would say that again, because this is the first step that we have taken in terms of our foreign policy, I think we are a little too late, and what we are doing at the moment is a little too less. While
But
I would like,
allow me to interject. Allow me to interject, please, because I want to. I deliberately did not mention the military aspect, the theaterization, and all of that, because I wanted to limit myself to the scope of your paper, which focuses exclusively on foreign policy. So I would like to ask you again, because again you have actually acknowledged the fact that yes, as far as institution building is concerned, New Delhi appears to be taking the lead. But again, we are well into 3 years of this current government in place, and there was a lot of hype, and there was a lot of charisma going on that there is going to be a revolution in the way we manage our systems. And one of the important things which I think you also mentioned in your paper was that our foreign minister, Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, when the government came to power, he assured that his ministry, the civilians will lead policy making. So we don't see those structural changes taking place. We don't see those big steps taking place. How much of a hindrance do you think? Does that not indicate lack of vision? Again, I think that question is really important.
that certainly does indicate a lack of vision, of course. You see, how I see it is that since in particular, if I talk about India, since the BJP government, it came into power, its foreign policy, it revamped to quite an extent. And at the moment when we talk about India, an important domain, an important contour of India's foreign policy is that it seeks to establish a footprint that is pretty much global in nature, But when we
Yes.
talk about Pakistan, and when we talk about the foreign policy objectives that Pakistan is currently pursuing, all the buzz is around regional integration, regional engagements, involvement in the region, and stuff like that. So, because of the fact that probably we are not looking at things in the longer run, we are lacking in terms of what we are doing as well. It's not only about the African states. And again, I would say that the current government talked about its African policy, then the policy towards the East Asian states, and being a part of CPEC, I think it couldn't be more pertinent for Pakistan at the moment to be very much proactive regionally across different regions, across Africa, across Southeast Asian countries. But we do not see that happening, and the reason is this: and you know what, I believe that this might happen in a few times. And the reason is this, that probably this is, if not the first time, then it is probably it has happened it has not really happened in the past, that we actually have research based analysis and informed analysis on the issues of foreign policy. We have again, we are doing research. We have we have academicians working on the foreign policy at the moment, but again, it is a little too less and a little too late. Things need to be worked out, and that's something which we talked in our perspective paper as well, that the foreign office, it is trying to revamp itself. There are there are these steps being taken in positive direction, but there is a long way to go. And forging appropriate ties, geo-economic as well as geostrategic ties with these countries, African countries, Southeast Asian countries. And I remember having read your perspective paper, which emphasized on the importance of the East African countries, and in that paper, it was very interesting for me to get to know that Pakistan has very limited diplomatic footprint in Africa. Now, that is something where we lack, and that is certainly, right of you saying that this is a lack of vision, and this is, perusal of status quo that we are experiencing. So yes.
So you believe that, a quick question again, just in furtherance to your recent comments, you believe that a change in a political government might actually discourage the little effort that has been made thus far in trying to build an academic approach, or do you think that the system itself is now in a position that it will build upon that, irrespective of whichever government comes to power in the federation?
You see, if we talk about the conditions in which the system is at the moment, I do not think that this is something which is unprecedented. The country was in the same position when there was the previous government in power, right? The CPEC was there, and
Absolutely.
everything was there. The transformation in the regional environment, the transformation on the international stage. But if I do not talk about international environment, certainly Pakistan kept a hush over whatever was happening in our regional environment, specifically about India. So when we talk about the positive aspects of the foreign policy, of Pakistan's foreign policy, I think the current government has to be, acknowledged for its efforts, because this is certainly, an initiative by the current government. We were in the same conditions in the previous governments. We didn't see anything happening. Again, as you said, after, the political landscape of the country changes, what would be the trajectory? I am not really sure that it would be very much rosy. I would, again, this is not, I would try to talk about the foreign policy being an unbiased person. It's not, any political inclinations coming into play while I talk about the policy. Because again, when we talk about the domestic policies by the government, the current government, they can be fairly debated. But in terms of the foreign policy, there are certain initiatives that need to be acknowledged. One among them is, the incorporation of research-based informed analysis when it comes to the issues of foreign policy. And in the next few years, all that we can do is that we can hope to see, more structural changes. I hope that, the recent paper that you wrote on the importance of East African countries, and about the pertinence of these states, and how we lack strategic depth in terms of our bilateral ties with these states. I hope we are able to generate some discourse about this, which is very pertinent, I believe.
And so, Rida, if I may ask you the same, if I may solicit your comments on the same. First of all, please answer that. Do you agree with this notion, which is my personal notion, and it is debatable, that there is a lack of vision when it comes to systemic adaptability? And secondly, do you share Maryam's optimism when she talks about academia the academics trying to gradually influence policy making?
So if I start from Maryam's point of view, that academia is gradually trying to change, that's true, because we have seen that the addition of Dr. Mueed Yusuf in PM's very close circle, in advisor to PM's very closer circle, it has given the enlarged academic circle a very positive thumbs up, that keep on your efforts, and maybe, like we have written this paper, and we have hopes that our efforts were very high in the recommendations section, because we wanted the recommendation section of the paper to be very comprehensive, brief, and to the point, that it actually can be incorporated in the by the policymakers while making the policies. So we the positivity and the optimism is there. It has always been there, and it will be there as you are working in the field. On the point that you made, that about the structural adaptability, and we're lacking in it, and the lack of vision, and maybe we're maintaining a status quo. I have I have a very my personal opinion on this is that one thing which we are lacking at the moment, it might be true, it's again debatable. What we're lacking is vision, and it's our own personal independent vision, the independent vision of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the independent vision of the government of Pakistan. How, if you may ask? The answer is that we are again
Yes.
under the dependent driving force of another major power. That China is somehow driving Pakistan's foreign policy directly or indirectly, in this way to make Pakistan as a model to follow by other countries which will become a part of BRI. That how we are maintaining Pakistan, and how we are maintaining Pakistan's policy. This is how the other countries should follow in the future as well, if they want to become a part of BRI. This is my personal opinion, and that's why Pakistan is indebted to better the relationships within the Persian Gulf, with Afghanistan, with the African countries, which Pakistan was not very keen to dive into. So how come this change happened very suddenly, very abruptly within this government? What sort of vision this government has brought in, that we are exploring the African region? This is a question again, that something has changed. And if we were to applaud our own government and our own foreign affairs ministry, but at the same time there seems to be an external influence as well, that something externally driven is driving our policies. So that's how I will answer this question, that yes, we are maintaining the status quo, and we are lacking an independent vision, which will happen if we will be domestically and economically independent, and all of these negative aspects of FATF and IMF will be reduced in the future.
That's a very interesting point, Talha. I'm sure you would agree that Rida and Maryam both have made this point, that they acknowledge that there is a problem when it comes to structural adaptability and evolution. But I think Rida substantiates it to the extent by saying that the economic hindrances we are facing are not actually conducive enough to enable those changes and act as a catalyst for it. What would you say on that, Talha? I'm looking forward to your comments on this.
I think there are some systemic constraints that have kept us back from making strides in some domains where we should have where we should have focused on long time back. I was listening quite intently to your comments, the comments made by Maryam and Rida. I think the vision is there. If we look at this government, they have initiated certain things that I found very interesting. Although I may not agree with the contours, I believe some of them have been rehashed and rebranded. The idea of digital diplomacy. Uh, I think more can be done. Then they have started projecting the scientific achievements of Pakistan. They have made this division in MOFA.
Indeed.
Then there is this talk about how the expatriates need to be applauded for their contributions to Pakistan. So these are some interesting things, and then we also observed that Uh, this idea is again being revived, is being put under consideration that we need to engage with East Asia. There is this buzz being generated around uh, the need to engage with the African continent. So I think that there is this desire to do more, and that desire stems from the vision that is there, but there is a serious lack of competence, and and there are certain systemic constraints as well, like this lack of competence. You talked about economic resources. So these are the issues that need to be resolved, and this optimism cannot be done away with. It will always stay. So that's all from my side.
Obviously, it's optimism is what keeps policymakers and thinkers on their foot, and eventually, if not now, then tomorrow, if writers like Maryam, Rida, or other researchers, when they try to propose their novel ideas, then eventually a time will come when the state and the system itself will have to accept that it is time to change and move on. I read in your paper, and this is not just your paper, my observation reflects similar findings in papers by other young scholars and seniors alike, that whenever we want to evaluate or try to understand the performance of Pakistan on the foreign policy front, we cite Jammu and Kashmir as the core determinant of success. So, for example, when we talk about Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, these particular regional groupings, they serve a larger purpose. SCO serves a larger collective shared interests of Eurasia, which are beyond Pak-India bilateral tussles or China-India bilateral tussles. Similarly, the case of ASEAN. So, in your view, and this is what I want to ask you, don't you think that this continued obsession with India, whether it is Kashmir or some other issue going on, accusations of money laundering or supporting terrorism, etc., don't you think that obsession with India continues to dominate our external engagements? Why don't we move? Why don't we evaluate or discuss the performance of Islamabad on other issues, like, for example, if how trade is faring with countries like Malaysia, how whether or not Pakistan has participated in SCO drills. And mind you, let me just give you one example that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization held several exercises, including urban um, rescue, disaster relief, and cyber, in which Pakistan did not take part simply because India was hosting it. So, what would you comment on that? I know this is a detailed question, but I want your comments on this. This obsession with India.
Shall I go first?
Yes, Rida.
So it's a very good question, because recently enough, I heard on a webinar, I heard the same question, which was regarding Pakistan's obsession towards USA and why our foreign policy is majorly based on our relations with US. So it's again the same dilemma in the region, that our most of our policies historically, even if we see, they are India centric and India based, and we have this, it won't be fair to call it an excuse, but it is somehow become a redundant reason that we are building an atomic bomb. Why? In order to counter India. Why is that? Only in order to counter India. If we see historically, yes, it was needed at that moment, but now we need to move on. We need to expand. And coming back to your question, that why our sole success is based on the performance of Jammu and Kashmir, I believe that now the scenario has changed. For example, since last year, after the revocation of Article 370 and all of the entire that incident, it's a high time it's a high time that when our horizontal diplomatic outreach, it is expanding, we are expanding relations and diplomatic ties with very different countries, and we are gaining somehow sympathies regarding Kashmir on international forums. A few countries are taking initiative to talk about Kashmir. Needless to say that OIC has not paid that much heed to it as much as we wanted OIC to talk about it. But at the same time, because internally somehow we have political stability for the first time in history, because of our establishment and the government both are on the same page while formulating the foreign policies, and therefore our agenda and our narrative internationally is seeming to be more credible and more legitimate and more unified front is given on international forums. Therefore, it's the right time to talk about Kashmir more. But the sole, if we talk about how our academia, they study that the success of our foreign policy is solely based on how Kashmir is taken up. We need to move on from that as well. As a young scholar and as a young researcher, I think I would say for majority of us that this discourse is being very redundant. That majority of our papers and our even different topics, they somehow bring the topic back to Kashmir and back to the basics, the redundant basics, and we don't move on from that. There's nothing going practically on ground. We are just discussing that yes, this should be done in the recommendations, but why something is not being done very on the ground, and there's just talk. Therefore, although at the same time the talk is getting redundant, but at the same time it is a high point for us to talk about it more internationally. There is an irony, but I believe that this is how I see it.
And I asked this question because, Mariam, I want your comments on this as well. But I would like to add another element to it because, to give you an example, Kashmir, the occupation of Kashmir by Indian military and its regime, its fascist regime over there, it is no doubt an issue of concern not just for us in Pakistan but for the Muslim community at large as well. There is no doubt about it. But the question then remains that, you see, when we talk about Afghanistan, see the Afghan peace process for the US, which is one of the biggest stakeholders, external stakeholders in Afghanistan. For them, Afghan peace process is one part of their concerns. They're also focused ultimately on China as well, on, for example, Turkey, on NATO, or other issues. And even when we talk about India, I mean, they have that problem. They continue to amplify this rhetoric that Pakistan is allegedly, sending cross-border terrorists, and they're trying to change the demographics of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But recently, the Indian Foreign Secretary, he is also, even the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, both of them, they visited Indian Ocean countries, Nepal, Bhutan, and they're trying to prioritize relations. So they're keeping a balance in things. They're not trying to, get overly fixated. Again, that word seems to be overused over here. But that fixation on one particular issue as the bedrock of an entire country's foreign policy, don't you think that that is something that should not, be the only determinant of success in our foreign policy posturing?
Well, to answer to that question, you see, and here I might, to some extent, I might disagree with, with what Rida said. You see, how I see it is, first and foremost, you cannot operate your foreign policy without without the geopolitical boundaries that you are subjected to. So Pakistan has historically had this obsession with the with India, and it was not particularly about the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. It was again a security issue in itself, a huge security issue in itself. So yes, indeed, Pakistan has remained very much centric. Pakistan's foreign policy has remained very much centric to India, and I would say even if ignoring the India factor, I'm Pakistan's foreign policy, ignoring that India factor, it has even then remained very much, unidirectional. So we had good relations with China, with some kind of partnership with the United States, some kind of, interaction with the Middle Eastern states, and that's it. So that is, I think, one reason why, the reason that when we talk about the foreign policy of Pakistan in terms of the success that it has, in terms of its successfulness, I think that is the reason why the issue of Kashmir or the issue of India, forms the basis of that analysis. Now, you see how I see it. This obsession with India, this is not a one-way traffic. If the state of Pakistan is obsessed with its is obsessed with whatever is taking place in India, I think it is it happens the other way around as well. For instance, issues like foreign policy, theoretically, even practically, foreign policy does not really become a co-determinant of your political co-determinant of your electoral victories and electoral failures. But this is
True.
something which we see happening in India. So again, I agree that there is this debate, and there is this discourse within the Western researchers within India as well, that Pakistan is very much obsessed with India. But the underlying aspect of this is that if we are obsessed, India is equally obsessed. Now, talking about the foreign policy that India is pursuing with reference to the other countries, now that is something which we are seeing, and which is a reality, that India is expanding its relations with African states, with the United States, with the East Asian states.
Indian Ocean countries.
Exactly. So that is something which is a given, which is true. But here I believe that while India is expanding its relations with other countries, that one obsession with Pakistan remains there. That is very much a part of their foreign policy. Even till
If I may ask you this, a sub question to the answer you have just given, the comments which you've shared. Yes, it is true that India is likewise as much obsessed with Pakistan as we are with them. But the point I'm trying to make it that it is not just Pakistan. You see, yes, they are, obsessed with trying to hyphenate Pakistan with terrorism now and then repeatedly. Whenever we talk about occupied Jammu and Kashmir, they automatically hyphenate Pakistan and say, okay, this is the state sponsor of terror. I'm just talking about the overall picture, because when you look at press statements coming out of their bilateral or multilateral interactions with other countries, I think you'd rarely find a mention of Pakistan unless it has something to do with Kashmir or an issue which relates to the Muslim domestic population going on over there. Whereas this is my personal observation, you are free to disagree with it. Whenever we are commenting on any diplomatic reaction, it is mostly around India, and we don't seem to be getting out of that orbit and looking at other places as well. I think the credit must go that Armenia and Azerbaijan issue has somehow diverted the attention. Talha will agree with what I'm saying, from the usual talk about the usual press statements with the same copy paste going on. So again, I agree with you that yes, India is also equally obsessed with Pakistan, but that obsession is not the only obsession. They're also obsessed with China, trying to counter China. They're obsessed with Nepal, and from what we are hearing in the press, the Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli is maybe expected to resign. The raw chief went over there, and they're trying to successfully inculcate a regime change over there. So why is it that we are, not? Why are we so focused on that?
You see, I feel that, of course, we are focused towards India, but at the same time, and this is something which we discussed in our perspective paper as well, that at the same time, Pakistan is also looking forward to expand, horizontally expand its relations with other countries. And that might be at the moment very much pronounced, in terms of discourse, not very much practical, not something which has practically manifested itself on ground. That's true. I think the reason is this, that historically Pakistan has had this focus on Kashmir, on India, on Afghanistan, and we have not looked outside those geographical boundaries and those challenges that we face due to those geopolitical, contingencies and limitations. But again, I feel that because India embarked upon that process a little, I would say, quite earlier than Pakistan, that is why we are seeing those things practically happening on ground. Pakistan, on the contrary, has, practically developed this understanding that Pakistan has to move on. I would not say move on. Pakistan cannot move on from the issue of India. Pakistan has to be even more, keeping in view the current geopolitical scenario in India, in Afghanistan. I feel that Pakistan has to be even more fixated on the issue of India. But at the same time, Pakistan has to, certainly it has to expand its relations with other countries. Pakistan has, I would say, as a first, Pakistan has at least developed this understanding that, we have to engage with other countries as well. How long how long it might take, to practically manifest itself, that again depends on the economic resources, on the, I would say, human resources, on the amount and the quantity and quality of research analysis that is, attached to this issue, and amount and the, extent of political will that, remains there. We might we might see things going into a positive direction in future. At the moment, we do not see them, and the reason is this, that we have started a little late. We have, taken up this path very late. So that's the reason I feel that this is not practically manifesting itself.
Well, on that note, I would just like to say, wrapping it up, that for some of our viewers, and especially also our listeners, which form a larger base on our audio podcast, they might say that this optimism expressed by these young researchers in their perspective paper could be misplaced. But I would like to say that instead of perceiving it as misplaced optimism, it is rather an indication that there is a fresh wave of new thinking in Pakistan's strategic research community, and the policy advice and recommendations which are mentioned in Rida, Anwar, and Maryam Rashid's paper, it actually points to a shift in the conventional means of thinking which have so far dominated policy discourse in Islamabad. And rather than trying to expand beyond the limited resources which we have, a careful reading of this perspective paper will enlighten the audience that there is the need felt to move beyond the traditional paradigm and into a domain in which new thinking forms the core, and what Rida and Maryam both have repeatedly stressed, that the academic led policy input, if that is sustained, if that momentum is sustained, then we can expect some sort of a systemic evolution to take place. Otherwise, if we revert back to the old era in which politics and short term visions, instead of informed discussions, guided policy making, that would obviously undo the little sort of progress that we are witnessing so far. So, before I bid farewell to our guests, Talha and I would like to inform the audience that you can access Rida and Maryam's perspective paper by clicking on the link on the description of the YouTube video. And you are also most welcome to share your feedback with them on Twitter. Rida and Maryam, it was a pleasure to have you and to hear from you. Your thoughts were very interesting, especially your perspectives in defense of your paper. We may disagree on certain points, but I think I'm sure my colleague Talha will agree that the arguments you've put in defense have given us considerable food for thought beyond that mentioned in your paper. Talha?
I would like to echo my gratitude to both of you. I shared the same thoughts as Zaki's, and it was really it was really good seeing you both defending the arguments that you have made uh, in your prospective paper. So keep doing good work.
And thank you once again. And to the audience, you may please check out the link in the description. To everyone in attendance, thank you very much for your time. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Allah
much.
Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.